Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Polish jets have intercepted a third Russian spy plane over the Baltic Sea in just 1 week. This as revelations come to light that Washington may be planning to slash its troop numbers in the likes of Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia, on top of cuts already announced in Romania. More on this developing story in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Latvian lawmakers vote to become the first EU country to pull out of a major domestic violence treaty. Polish schools mark Rainbow Friday in a bid to promote awareness for the LGBTQ+ community. And as some seek Halloween candy, Poles look to their ancestors. America appears set to withdraw more troops from NATO's eastern flank as reports point to resized developments in Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia. It comes in the same week that Washington announced cuts in Romania, with EU officials telling TVP World tonight the shift brings European defence spending back into the spotlight. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports on these deployments from Brussels.
Well, with Polish jets having to yet again intercept Russian aircraft, that defence of Europe's eastern flank will be a prime concern for European leaders. We've heard, of course, the United States removing troops from Romania, but now also from possibly Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia as early as December. That will be a cause for concern, and also some experts saying not a particularly strategically wise move. Certainly the feeling from Robert Pschell from the Centre for Eastern Studies.
They are not strategically wise, frankly speaking, but then there's a lot of things that this US administration is doing that it's not strategically wise. But in the grand scheme of things, if the new announcements, the other announcements, they pass the test of credibility when it comes to a simple measure that even if there are some reductions or some transfers, that they do not change the overall posture and the strength of the US commitment.
But perhaps a word of caution as well from Romania's foreign minister, speaking exclusively to TVP World, indicating that although there will be a reduction in force posture from the United States on the eastern flank of Europe, it is not the US completely pulling the rug from under Europe's feet.
The current decision, which is to reassess the number of troops they have in Europe, specifically the brigade that had exercises in Romania, Hungary and Slovakia, that is currently in Germany coming back to the United States, is a decision that does not affect the long-term and short-term defense and deterrence capacity that we have on the eastern flank, because it is a pre-prepared decision in the sense that the United States has announced its NATO allies for a long time.
So that reduction in troop numbers in those countries, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, as I mentioned, as well as Romania, we already knew will be seen, of course, as an emphasis on why Europe needs to ramp up its defense spending, its defense posture, its defense preparedness. We've seen increases in spending, particularly in Poland and other frontline countries, but certainly the urgency now made clearer if Europe cannot continue to rely on that US deterrence on its eastern flank. Certainly the goal here, the aim, is to have enough of a military presence, enough military strength on the eastern borders of the European Union to ensure there will be no further Russian aggression following its invasion of Ukraine. We have seen those hybrid attacks, those airspace violations, drones allegedly linked to Russia violating airspace across the European Union will be a cause for concern. Hence why that removal of US troops will also be a worry. Europe needs to step up to defend its eastern flank. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
And as we go to air, reports are also emerging that the Pentagon has cleared the White House to deliver long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine based on its latest stockpile assessment. The ultimate political decision, of course, now lies with US President Donald Trump, and we'll have any further updates right here on TVP World. Latvia could soon become the first country in the European Union to pull out of an international treaty protecting women from violence. The country's lawmakers have voted to leave the Istanbul Convention after a spat within the ruling coalition. But as Kazimierz Swiszak reports, people are now taking to the streets in Riga to voice their opposition, and the move could still be blocked by by the president.
With the result of 56 to 32, the Latvian parliament decided to leave the Istanbul Convention on Thursday. The applause from just one side of the room reflecting the deep division on the issue.
Withdrawing from the convention may raise questions about Latvia's commitment to upholding common European standards.
The Istanbul Convention of the Council of Europe is a series of legislative solutions aimed at protecting women, especially in cases of domestic abuse. The treaty's opponents argue that it introduces a definition of gender going beyond biological sex.
To other nations and their governments that want to reproach us, including those from the EU, I will say this: respect the Latvian people, our traditions, our constitution.
But many Latvians are actually outraged by the result of the vote. Some 5,000 protesters gathered outside the Latvian parliament in one of the biggest public demonstrations in years.
Given that I myself have suffered violence, I remember what things were like before the Istanbul Convention. It's important that we stay committed to ensuring that human rights are respected.
Some members of the ruling coalition are blaming the result of the vote on Russian influence in the country. Latvia has the biggest Russian minority in Europe, percentage-wise, at 25% of the population.
Unfortunately, in my opinion, even normal patriotic parties have been influenced by pro-Kremlin and populist forces in the pre-election atmosphere, creating an anti-European atmosphere and promoting it.
But what got the vote across the line was actually the ruling coalition's conservative partner, the Greens and Farmers Union.
There are going to be international consequences, and especially in a time where there's, where Latvia's Latvia's sort of standing or geopolitical orientation is very important when it comes to Russia's war in Ukraine.
Some analysts believe this case is more of an exception in Latvian politics, but also an example of a growing trend in European politics, populist Eurosceptic parties having a bigger presence than before.
I don't think that Latvia is heading in a similar direction as some of the countries in the Visegrad region, but of course I do think that all countries in Europe will have parties that are populists, that win elections. Some of them will be in coalition governments.
And yet the vote doesn't necessarily mean that Latvia will pull out of the treaty. The decision now has to be approved by the president, who says he will focus on facts rather than ideology.
I will assess the law, taking into account state and legal, rather than ideological or political considerations.
Out of the Council of Europe's 46 member states, only a handful of European countries, including the Czech Republic, Hungary, Lithuania and Slovakia, are yet to join the Istanbul Convention. Should Latvia withdraw from the treaty, it would be the second country to do so after Turkey and the first EU country to make the move. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Tens of thousands of protesters are expected in Serbia's second largest city this weekend, a year on since the collapse of a railway station canopy killed 16 people. The Novi Sad tragedy in November last year sparked ongoing anti-government demonstrations. Our Balkans correspondent Pavel Trzaskowski is there tonight and joins me now. Good evening, Pavel. So what can we expect over the coming days? Will these be peaceful demonstrations, or might we see violent clashes?
Well, Aaron, if I were to put my money on something, I would think that tomorrow should be rather peaceful. And this is because I heard today the state address of the country's president, Alexander Vučić, who, after months of disregard for the protest movement, apologized today and asked for national unity tomorrow. Please listen.
Let tomorrow be a day that unites us, not a day that further tears us apart. The day when we will unite in the grief of families and show our respect and love for them. Not a day that any of us will use for our own political benefit. And after tomorrow, let's try one more time with dialogue in society. Those who want to protest can continue to do so, but with more respect for their countrymen who disagree with them, with more respect for the laws and rules in society that we all have to follow.
And another telltale sign that tomorrow could be rather peaceful was a little situation that I had upon arrival in Serbia today. I was asked many detailed questions by police, and the police officer assured me that this is to ensure my safety during my reporter's trip. And if you juxtapose it against the reports of numerous harassments and numerous journalists being detained over the last year by the police while covering the protests, it might be a sign that the ruling SNS party and President Alexander Vučić do not want any trouble tomorrow. I am yet to enter Novi Sad, but it is reported that thousands have already gathered there for tomorrow's protests, probably the biggest protests since the movement started last year. I will be there, of course, to cover that for you. Aaron.
Paweł Trzaskowski from outside Novi Sad, thank you. Moving to Poland now, where schools have marked Rainbow Friday in a bid to celebrate diversity and raise awareness for the LGBTQ+ community. Even so, the country remains one of the least LGBTQ+ friendly places across the European Union, and little has changed in recent years, despite big promises from the ruling coalition. Piotr Miszczuk has more.
Rainbows shone over Polish schools on Friday. This is part of the Rainbow Friday celebrations aimed at celebrating diversity.
That is the main goal of the Rainbow Friday, that we accept those people. They are normal, they aren't some kind of deviants. They're here to stay, and we are there for them.
Thousands of students have taken part in this year's event that included a range of workshops, happenings, film screenings and discussion panels.
Over 100 schools from across the country are participating in Rainbow Friday this year, not only from large cities, but also from small towns.
But Poland remains one of the least LGBT+ friendly places throughout the European Union, ranking only behind Romania. One prominent member of the community is Katarzyna Zilman, a silver medalist in rowing from the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo.
For most people, especially in big cities, it's really good. I would love to say that the small community, like small towns, would be that much good, but I know it's a kind of problem.
Clashes like this between LGBT+ people and counter-protesters were commonplace during the previous government of the right-wing conservative Law and Justice Party. When Donald Tusk and his more centrist coalition came to power in December 2023, he promised to work on new LGBT+ legislation, but the results were not what non-gender conforming minorities had hoped for.
Nothing has changed really. We cannot really talk about any kind of legal progress.
There have, however, been some improvements. The LGBT-free zones in municipalities that declared themselves unwelcoming to LGBT+ rights are now a thing of the past, and the situation of trans people has slightly improved.
It is sufficient for transgender people to submit an application to the district court for a correction of their registered gender by changing their certificate of civil status. This is a significant simplification, above all because it is not necessary to sue your parents, which was quite a traumatic situation.
New legislation is to be pushed by two groups in the ruling coalition, the Progressive New Left and the Conservative Polish People's Party.
It regulates issues related to the right to housing, the possibility of mutual alimony, mutual access to medical information, and exemption from inheritance and gift tax.
But according to experts, even if the new legislation is not vetoed by the president, it will not improve the situation significantly, as it fails to address the most pressing issues.
It does not address very important areas of LGBT+ people's lives, namely children, that is, the right of children in same-sex couples. The bill does not regulate that at all.
Polish society, however, has grown to become more welcoming of the LGBT+ community.
We are seeing a steady trend of growth of public support for marriage equality, which has reached 50% 2 years ago and is still rising. And we do see that the issue of fighting discrimination and protecting LGBT plus people in general is still recognized by Polish society as something that has to be addressed legally.
Yet, given that Poland's new president, Karol Nawrocki, is from the conservative Law and Justice camp, it's uncertain whether the LGBT plus community will soon receive any respite, at least in legal terms. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
As kids in America and Canada go trick-or-treating for candy on Halloween, Poles turn to their ancestors to bring the past back to life. Aja Abache travelled to northern Poland to witness this reborn Slavic tradition.
There comes a time when we lose someone close to us. Dziady is very meaningful because on that night we can feel their presence, meet them once again, talk to them, and thank our ancestors for what they gave us and what they taught us.
This is Halloween's Polish counterpart, Dziady, or Forefathers Eve, a centuries-old Slavic tradition devoted to honoring one's ancestors. And here's what a reenactment looks like. At the Grodzisko Museum in Sopot, a spectacle inspired by literary accounts of Dziady brings this ancient ritual to life, helping audiences rediscover a forgotten chapter of Slavic spirituality.
First, we must welcome the sacred fire. Then we call upon our ancestors and the gods to join us so that we can celebrate together, feast together, share our successes, ask them for health, for happiness, for peace, but also thank them for what they have taught us, for teaching us how to be human.
The Karaboshka masks are worn to imitate the dead and burned to guide souls back to the afterlife. The ritual was strongly linked to a belief that during seasonal changes, especially in October and November, spirits of the dead return to the world of the living, making it possible to interact with one's ancestors.
This topic becoming more popular because for many years there was not enough sources and not enough information about the traditions, and right now I think that we can say that it's reborn.
In the past though, Dziady had a slightly spookier touch, celebrated with feasts held right at ancestral graves. Eating and drinking at burial grounds was seen as a way to spend time with those long gone.
It's really important for today, for the society, to know where our roots are.
I was born as a Christian, yes, but I feel deep inside my heart I'm a Slavic man.
I feel interested.
After the Christianization of the Slavs and Balts, this pagan remembrance evolved into All Saints' Day, when Poles still spend nights by the graves of loved ones, lighting candles in their memory. It's safe to say that in Poland, graveyards are less about fear and more about love, gratitude, and continuity.
We return now to our top story, Russia's threats along NATO's eastern flank and Washington's mooted plans to pull troops out of the region. Joining me to break it all down is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening, ma'am.
Hello.
So for a third time this week, Polish jets have intercepted Russian spy planes over the Baltic Sea. Is Vladimir Putin trying to make a mockery of Warsaw and of NATO's eastern flank?
I think he's creating mischief and headlines and trying to upset people. The war in Ukraine is not going well for him. And, so he's now nibbling at the edges of NATO, not quite attacking, but bugging everybody and sending balloons and all kinds of nonsense. It's dangerous. He's playing with fire. And I would hope that the NATO countries have warned him that if he has another jet or any drone enter anybody's airspace, they'll just shoot it. They'll give him a warning and shoot it down, as Turkey did a few years ago. So, and he's also, at the same time as he continues to do this, he just tested 2 of the worst nuclear weapons in history. This is a warning. This is designed to scare and rattle people. And he's just really, I think he's at loose ends to look powerful in the light of the fact that his army is a complete failure.
So tell me, what role does America play in all of this? Because I guess if Russia viewed Washington as taking a hardline stance, as unequivocally backing Europe, it might be not so comfortable toying with the West.
Well, the Americans are in NATO, and they are, they have troops. They have troops in Poland, they have troops in Germany, they have troops in Latvia, and some troops in Romania and here and there. There's no question that, Trump has inherited support for NATO and Ukraine with his presidency. However, he's also at the same time been berating the Europeans for not pulling their weight to date, Poland accepted. And so, that's part of things that he does. It's not a withdrawal of support. And no, he's not given the Tomahawks, which Ukraine requested, just yet. But, he's still hoping that his sanctions, pressure, and European mobilization, which hopefully is underway, are going to persuade Mr. Putin that he can't win and he should get to the negotiating table.
Well, you mentioned the troops there. We've heard that US troops are being resized in a number of different countries, obviously in Romania, but there's now reports of further cuts in the likes of Hungary and the likes of Slovakia and Bulgaria. Is it fair to say that Donald Trump and his White House is somewhat desperate to leave Europe to its own defences, to kind of get out of here?
No, not get out. I don't see that as happening. Although, the Russian disinformation machine is broadcasting, oh, they're taking troops out of Romania. Oh, they're giving up. Europe is toast. That's a lot of propaganda coming out of the Kremlin. I think we're talking 700 troops are downsized out of Romania, leaving 1,000 behind, a brigade and a base and all kinds of other things. Basically, this is a slow restructuring of the defense system in Europe to hand over as much as possible to the Europeans themselves, who, after all, should be 100% responsible for defending the European continent. And so, I don't see it as a withdrawal. I see it as a reworking. For instance, Romania, it should become a hub. And, the countries around Romania, like Greece and Italy and Slovakia, Hungary, and so on, should be fortifying and militarizing the Romanian hub to protect the Black Sea, which they also all rely on. And so, there's kind of, Europe has to get its act together. And so I don't see it as a scary thing. And also in September, Trump said in Poland that they were going to deploy more troops in Poland. So there's no overall withdrawal. There's none of that.
And the Pentagon has so far also told us, and I quote, that this is not an American withdrawal from Europe or a signal of lessened commitment to NATO in Article 5. But what message do you think this sends to European leaders? I mean, how do you think European leaders will be seeing this behind closed doors? For example, I spoke to the Foreign Minister of Romania, Oana Tsoiu, last night, and she told me, look, we respect the decision, but we're not celebrating it.
Well, of course not. It means they're going to have to get soldiers in place and pay the cost themselves and take responsibility for it, maybe even more responsibility for it. Europe is still trying to get its act together. It's not there yet. And Trump is just doing gradually what is going to happen eventually anyway. And that is hopefully Europe will be freestanding. Ukraine will be part of Europe. Russia will be defeated or stopped and that sort of thing. What Trump has also done, though, is that, in response to Putin's detonation of 2 horrible nuclear devices is that he has also talked about going back to testing nuclear weapons. That is putting Putin on notice that, you know, you can scare everybody all you want, you don't scare us, and we're a big nuclear power as well. So it's kind of this is kind of another pressure point to try and get him to stop.
How telling will the Tomahawks be in terms of America's support for Ukraine? You mentioned the Tomahawks earlier. We're hearing tonight that the Pentagon has given the White House the green light to send the long-range missiles to Ukraine. Of course, the decision now lies with Donald Trump. Do you see that coming anytime soon?
Well, he wants it known that he's got the button, that he can push that button. You know, that he has permission, and he's ready to use give the Tomahawks to and escalate the war that Ukraine can wage against inside Russia. And so that gives him leverage in talks going forward. It's more pressure. So is the promise that he's going to do nuclear testing and all of that. So the signs are there. But I think the most incredible development this week geopolitically is the truce that the United States reached with China. This is enormous. This is enormously damaging to Putin because it isolates Putin. China and the US are economic partners who are integrating more than ever. He's very dependent on China. China's priority now is going to be to get the tariff thing organized, to become more prosperous, and to stay friends with the United States. Putin is getting isolated. That is a huge blow.
Let's talk about that meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping, because some are saying, look, they did talk about Ukraine for some time, but at the end of the day, China appears to be firmly in Russia's court. We spoke to exiled Russian opposition leader Garry Kasparov. He told us a few days ago that Beijing is banking on Moscow's war. I mean, do you see it in that way? Did President Trump miss his chance to convince Xi? Was he putting this trade war above all else? Or were there, in your view, was there tangible progress made effectively on Ukraine?
Ukraine wasn't discussed at the table, and neither was Russia. But what I'm saying is that the two biggest economic players in the history of the world have agreed to drop their spat over tariffs on both sides and to do more business together, which means they'll integrate more. And to also, you know, and now, at the same time, that's the geopolitical development that's happened that I think is enormously dangerous and negative for Putin. But that doesn't mean that China isn't going to continue to do business with Russia. You know, it sells a lot of stuff to Russia. Russia doesn't make cars and laptops. China does. And Russia needs customers for its oil, and China's its biggest customer. So you think about this. You've got China now cozying up with the Americans. China, yes, is dependent on Russia, but Russia's more dependent on China than the other way around. And so China now has a lot of leverage in the hopes of trying to get Putin to stop. And they're not going to necessarily go public politically with this, but economically now, the stage is set. Russia's isolated. And it's isolated geoeconomically, and also that pivot means a geopolitical pivot.
Now, we're running out of time, but lastly, do you think that means that this proposed Budapest meeting falling through between Trump and Putin matters? Because we're hearing that the Kremlin repeated its demands that Ukraine give up large parts of its territory, cut its troops, scrap plans to join NATO, and the US said, look, it seems like there's no desire to compromise. Are we any closer to peace?
There's no such thing as peace until Putin agrees to stop. And he will not stop until he's defeated. And so what he's done yet again is demonstrate, and juxtaposed with the Chinese deal, look how irrational and unreasonable he is. China is a country run by a large Politburo who are businessmen and technocrats. They want to make money, not war. And then you've got the irrational maniac in Moscow to deal with. The contrast couldn't be greater, and it diminishes Putin's importance and influence around the world. And it's got to start to make some of the Russian people behind him or underneath him think twice about the fact of what's going to happen next. He can't win and he won't lose, but he's got to be defeated. And he will be economically first, probably.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you as always for your time.
You're welcome.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.